Thank you, Louise, and hello everyone and welcome to OTF Connects. We're very happy to be back this year and absolutely delighted with the rich program that we're planning now for the new year. I'd like to thank each of you for giving of your own time to join us tonight. It's wonderful to have representation from along the southern part of Ontario. Hopefully we can spread the word across the province. And it's always great to have new participants in the room. So welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome Garfield Ginny Newman from the Critical Thinking Consortium. Garfield will be facilitating tonight's session on sustained inquiry and secondary science. Garfield has facilitated numerous webinars for OTF Connects over the last 4 years and consistently pushes our thinking in the work that he does. I'm especially pleased tonight that he is supporting teachers in the area of science. So welcome, Garfield. I'll now pass the mic over to you.
Thanks, everyone. And just double check, make sure my mic's working okay. Can you hear me okay, Louise?
Sounds good, Garfield. A little bit echoey, but if we have any issues
back up from the mic. How's that? Okay?
Yes, that sounds good. Thanks.
If it's not, I can grab some headphones. It will help, so let me know. I have to, a couple of quick questions to start. I noticed a star placed in southwestern Ontario, kind of close to Lake Huron. I'm just curious, and then above Hamilton. Where are you folks from? I'm just curious, the star and the exclamation mark in the blue towards Lake Huron. Hamilton, Kincardine. Great, thanks. I grew up in Clifford, so it's kind of my stomping ground area growing up. So I was curious when I saw the one popping up near Kincardine. People usually, if they've been to Clifford, it's been on the way to Kincardine or somewhere like that. And you actually know where Clifford is, Louise? Oh, fascinating. Normally people have no idea where I'm talking about. Anyway, and by the way, just as an aside, when I work with young kids and they find out my name is Garfield, yes, Peter's brother was my best friend in high school. When they find out my name is Garfield, it always gets a chuckle from kids, and then they find out I grew up in Clifford and they think of a big red dog. And then they find out I married a genie and they just think I'm some kind of walking cartoon. My other question for everyone, if that's okay, is could you just, in the chat window, let me know what grade you're teaching in science. I know we have folks at least signed up ranging from grade 7 to 12. So if you could let me know the grade levels, that'd be great. Great, thank you very much. Wonderful. So just a little bit of context, those of you who may know me, science is not my content area, so I'm hoping to be provocative in thinking about how we approach learning in sciences, but I'm looking forward to you folks providing and tweaking and pushing the content envelope, and we'll connect it into the inquiry. On the other hand, I will tell you our daughter, Nikita, is in her second year in life sciences at Toronto, so some ideas that are emerging from watching as she engages with the science, and Siri, if you're still on, has been very helpful at times in supporting Nikita, so it's been a fun journey watching Nikita engage in science and having revelations. So we're going to begin to explore some pieces around inquiry in science and try to keep it practical as we can. So I'll just start us off. And some of you will have been with me in sessions, so you may have done this activity, my apologies, but I want to model some pieces. If you could give this a score from, and behind the bar on the left, there are numbers that are just hidden. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can see the 5 peeking out at the top. Would you say that transportation in the past 200 years has gone from the bottom image to the top, has undergone almost no change, little change, some change, considerable change, or dramatic change? So if you wouldn't mind just in the box, Give it a score from 1, almost no change, to 5, dramatic change. And if you wouldn't mind, I've seen lots of 5s. Could you cite some evidence that would support that decision that you've made? Okay, so I'm seeing how fast we can travel. Okay, so I'm seeing the shift, the efficiency, the source of energy, the distance, the materials. Great. Wow, and from animals to complex machines. Okay. Catherine, you raised an interesting one, from speed, animal, machine, and pollution created. I wonder if you graphed the third one. Did we peak and are we in decline? Are we returning back down to? That's an interesting one to pose to students about which of these 3 images is the most environmentally friendly or unfriendly, and can we surpass with technology? That's an interesting one you raised. All right, let me show you another set of pictures. If you can do the same scoring for me, please. Here's a kitchen over the past 200 years, so from 200 years ago, 1950s today. How much has the kitchen changed? I'm seeing the opposite end here coming up. 1s, 2s, 3s. Again, could you cite some evidence? Why do you think kitchens have undergone less change? Okay, the need is the same. Okay. It's women in all the pictures still doing the cooking, okay? What other evidence? Why a lower score here? Now, some of you put in 2 and 3. Can you give me? Okay, so Sylvia, thank you. I want to see a little bit of evidence why a 3. So there's some change. What would you use to support? There's lots of reasons why limited change. What would support that there's been some change, that it's not at the bottom? Efficiency, okay. But only a retrofit. Wonderful. Okay, last set. Here's a classroom from 200 years ago, a classroom from the 1950s, and a classroom from today. If you were to place the classroom from 1 to 5, almost no change to dramatic change, where do you put the classroom over the past 200 years? Okay, interesting response. We're more in the middle here, and lots of thank you. So we're seeing some 4s, some 3s, no 5s. So can you give me some evidence? I'm seeing a little bit of it that technology has been added in the picture. Why no 5? So let's start on that end. Why is no one teacher still at the front? Give me some other reasons why no one is willing to go as high as 5. Still largely teacher directed. Oh, it's still sitting down. Okay. Seem to be passive. Okay, so we could be limited by what the picture reveals. Can I hear some evidence if I just flip my question around, because I don't think anyone gave it a 1. So what evidence would you use to cite that it's a 2 or a 3, that it's not all the way down to 1? Okay, so the different delivery, so the content delivery through the internet versus instructor. Now, I want you to hang on to this thought. More personalized instruction, hopefully. Okay, we're going to come back to the top image later on and have a closer look. Some of you have raised the fact that we need to know what else is going on. So hopefully later on we will get a chance to step in a little closer to that image and have a look at it. So what we want to talk about this evening, and the pedagogical approach we talk about is creating a thinking classroom. And what we mean by that is a classroom where students think to learn and learn to think. And so what we mean by that phrase is that the learning that happens in classrooms is a result of students engaged in thinking, not passively receiving, But at the same time, inquiry is more than students simply exploring an area of interest. It's also the teacher providing the intellectual tools that students need. So we need to teach students how to be thoughtful, how to think scientifically, how to think critically. So what we want to look at is how do we create a thinking classroom. And the definition we use in the Critical Thinking Consortium for critical thinking, and I know some of you by name, and I know that you'll be familiar with this slide, is that what we want to do is find ways to problematize the learning. So create problematic situation where the students are having to actively engage in thinking about making reasoned judgments using intellectual tools. And we'll touch on those in a moment, just briefly to set up this evening. And another piece that we've been exploring in the Critical Thinking Consortium is what's the relationship between critical, creative, and collaborative thinking. And the conclusions we're arriving at is that perhaps the conversations we want to have in schools is not so much about critical thinking versus creative thinking, but rather quality thinking, and that we think that there are three key dimensions for quality thinking in classrooms. A critical dimension that has us assessing, in essence, responding to ideas or to issues or to information. A creative component, which is productive and innovative, and a collaborative component that has us building on ideas and understandings of others, and building on, in the way science has for centuries, on understandings that we might garner from others. So we think that quality thinking in a thinking classroom has critical, creative, and collaborative elements to it. And just for clarity, as I talk today, because we're here to talk a bit about inquiry in science, I will use the term critical inquiry, and I'm going to unpack that in just a moment. Critical inquiry is the issue that we want to explore or examine, or the concept we want kids to understand. So it's the what kids inquire into. When we use the term critical challenge, it's the task that kids will complete in response to the inquiry that creates the context or the meaning for the learner. And I've put there that, when well framed, it activates the amygdala, the emotional central of the brain, and increases engagement. And critical thinking is the process by which learning occurs. So it activates the prefrontal cortex to engage students through the interesting activity and encourage them to be thoughtful in the processing of that information. So some of you might wonder why we use the term critical inquiry, and sometimes people say, well, isn't inquiry by itself critical? And you could make that case, but we want to highlight that when kids explore a topic, so if I were involved in a science fair project, it's not to look up information and report what I found, but it's to critically examine, in other words, use the evidence to arrive at thoughtful decisions. So we want to engage kids in meaningful inquiry in which they're attempting to solve an issue or a problem. By the way, just as an aside, and something maybe I'll post on Twitter later if folks want to have a look, I was just playing with early this morning this notion, and I wanted to get you to think about it, that we can create tasks or activities in our class that I would call fake. I'm going to post these online so in the chat you can see. And so my first fake refers to the nature of the product or task, and the second fake refers to the audience. So a fake task would be perhaps a unit test or a worksheet. And what I mean by that is the product or performance kids are doing is very much a school-based activity, something you wouldn't do outside of school. It's something we do in classrooms, but isn't really authentic in terms of life beyond. And the second fake refers to who's the audience. Who was I creating the product or performance for? And if it's, teacher creates it, or sorry, student creates it, teacher marks and hands it back, fake. Then we might go to fake real. So fake real is that the product or performance is, I'm going to do a report on a science topic. So I've gone out and I've looked up what I could find, I've located information, I created a beautiful display board reporting on what I found, and I submitted it to a science fair competition. So the real now, notice I'm not creating this for the teacher to mark, I'm creating this to enter it in a competition in which I have an audience beyond the classroom. So the task itself wasn't really that authentic in nature, but there's an audience beyond the class. It increases the real part of it. Then we might go to what I call real fake. And what I mean by that is kids come up with, are asked to design a science experiment that they could conduct in class, and they have to submit their plan, carry out the experiment, and then submit the results to the teacher. So it's an authentic task where kids design and carry out and report back on an experiment, but the only person to ever see the results of it are the teacher. So there's no authentic audience. It's just, do this work, teacher marks it, hands it back. And ultimately, where I would like to see us get is what I would call real. A science fair opportunity where kids actually take, so if I combine the last two, that, well, I'll give you an example. My daughter for her science fair in grade 8 studied the science. She wanted to examine the science behind the perfect pirouette. She's a ballet dancer. She wanted to see how physics could help her improve her pirouette. And she submitted her results in the science fair. So there was a competition where she had to be judged among, competing amongst her peers. And she chose to research and test and apply science that had an authentic and real-life application. So that would be real. Or students doing science in an authentic context, looking at, let's say, looking at wetlands and assessing the quality, the sustainability of wetlands, and producing a report to be shared publicly could be real. I'm going to just pause there and love to get your thoughts on this notion. My thinking is if we can engage kids in inquiry projects that are authentic in nature in terms of product or performance and authentic in terms of audience, will it help increase engagement for students? Will it help kids see relevance and lead to great success, especially in applied classes or classes where kids are not yet committed to a science future in university or college? So I have two questions I'm going to just pause. I'd love you to respond to. Is the notion of fake, real, fake, and real helpful? Does it help teachers just take a task and think about how I might up it from real fake to real? And secondly, can you offer sample tasks that fit either side? Remember, my first reference point is the nature of the product or performance. Is it authentic or inauthentic? And the second one refers to the audience. So who might the audience be that increases relevance or context for kids? And again, authentic to more, the fellow classmates or the teacher versus the general public. So I'm going to stop for just a moment. Love to get your feedback. Is this notion helpful? Is it worth exploring further? Can you offer some examples of authentic products or performances and authentic possible audiences for those? So I'm going to stop there. Hope to get a few thoughts back from you. Sorry, and I should say, if any of you feel like you want to jump on the mic rather than typing, just jump on. I'll turn mine off just for a moment, but feel free to jump on the mic and describe or explain an idea that you have. And thanks.
Yeah, it's interesting. You started to describe it, and I'm like, oh, well, that's a grid, right? So as you were talking, I grabbed my iPad and jotted out a fake, real grid to try and plot those kind of things. I think it's a useful. I think it would be a useful tool to help us think about what we do with kids and to think about, sometimes we have like a standard list of tasks that we do in a class or standard list of assignments or whatever, and it would give us an opportunity to sort of examine those and say, okay, are those assignments kind of worth doing? What's the value for the student? So to me, it would be a useful sort of way of looking at the things we do for kids. When you first started talking about it, I wasn't sure where you were going with the fake, real kind of thing. If you're going to look at doing this with teachers in terms of language, I'm not sure that's maybe the best language, because the first thing that went through my mind was the stuff I do is not fake. It's it's for learning. It's for a purpose. So maybe there's a better way of framing it that way. But I think the idea itself, as a way to kind of test tasks and test ideas and things that we do with kids, not necessarily to, for a judgment purpose at this point, but to see if we can get more value out of them, which I guess is a judgment in some way. But it's that fine line between, good or bad, or can we just improve it, and what's the point of doing it? So I think it has some value. As you were talking about it, I was, unpacking it a little bit here in front of me. So it's obviously working a little bit on that level.
Great. Thanks, Paul. I wanted to say, I think your point's really valid, and I found it odd myself. So two quick things, and Lisa, I want to get you to jump in on this. One is I found myself when I said real fake, it sounds like I'm going like it's extra fake. It's like super fake, and so that just didn't roll off the tongue properly. And then I think there's a danger as well with the fake. So the terminology might be a bit dangerous in that. My daughter writing a multiple choice exam in biology in grade 12 was really not fake for her next 4 years doing a science degree at university, because she's going to encounter them and she bloody well better figure out how to handle them. So in a sense, in her academic career, it's a very real task. So I wonder if we could use maybe we can explore something like maybe authentic. Is it authentic or inauthentic, or I don't know, degrees of authenticity or something. Anyway, I'm glad to see that the concept has value. I did use it today. I'm out in Calgary, and it was interesting, the response from teachers that immediately saw opportunities to take an interesting task and added an authentic audience, and how much it would engage their students by just thinking about who might we share this with. And then it had a bit of an impact of reframing what the task itself was to create a more authentic task. So they found it a helpful conversation to just increase the richness of the task and the audience. But I'm loving the comments I'm seeing here. If we get the terminology, we may get a richer conversation, and be careful that we don't offend. I'm going to stop for a moment and have Lisa jump in. I'll just turn off my mic.
Okay. Hi, Garfield. Can you hear me?
Yep, I hear you well.
Okay. I found the fake real really catchy and useful, and it's just made me rethink something I've done recently with my students. We were studying the kidneys function within the excretory unit in grade 12. And I did just that and went and got a real audience. I wanted the kids to be good at expressing their understanding of it. So we Skyped with a triple transplant recipient who just got out of the hospital about 2 weeks ago. He has had a cornea transplant, kidney transplant, and most recently a pancreatic transplant, which ties him into the homeostasis unit. And he's been diabetic since 9 years old, and he's no longer diabetic. And it was very, very enriching. But what I did after that was a lab on urine analysis, and it was, of course, fake urine. And now I'm rethinking this and wondering, I think next time I'm going to ask this transplant recipient to give us his urine analysis before and after transplants, so that the kids can analyze that and maybe judge which one was before and which one was after. I'm starting to kick this idea around. I hope I'm on the right track.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. By the way, just a reminder that at the end of the session, Louise will post the chat window and the conversation, and which I think is great, because there's some really good ideas I want to take from here and share with others. So ideas that come up, and anything you can post in the chat window will allow you guys to go back and review it and slow it down and pull some stuff. So I'm just reading a comment. Oh, interesting point that the fake real may just push our thinking a little more. So maybe using a bit of provocative language might be a good thing. Okay, so this is good. We'll test this out. So let's move along. I'm just pulling from, and I'm sure all of you know this. This is the statement within the Ontario Science Curriculum, which is now getting a little, a few years old. But I do want to pick up on on the key piece here about being scientifically literate. And there's a reason I want to pick up on this, and just going back to the fake, real thing, that scientifically literate can read and understand common media reports, critically evaluate information. And what I want to say to you, one of the things I've thought about in terms of science, like when my daughter got into grade 11 and 12, she's doing science in university, it's a bit of a different group of kids taking grade 12 physics than maybe grade 9 applied science who need their science credit. And it strikes me as I think about, so why do all kids need to be scientifically literate? And I think your curriculum captures it nicely, that if you're scientifically literate, at least to some degree, you are less likely to get taken by unscrupulous media ads. Like, you'll be able to say, that just makes no sense. It's interesting to, when I go into the dealership where my son's a mechanic and building BS detectors is absolutely right. They're selling, nitrogen in your tires for, $70, and my son will say, well, if you're landing a jet plane, you might want to do that, but I don't think you don't need it. They're selling you something, and that's his understanding of, Dad, nitrogen is 78, or air is already 78% nitrogen anyway, and the driving you're doing, you don't need it. It strikes me that if we approached science, certainly in 9 and 10, from be scientifically literate to protect yourself in life. In fact, I think we could do an entire grade 9 year through an Adbusters approach or a BS detectors. Imagine you framed a grade 9 science class. This is going to be the BS detector science class. We're going to get you to explore how science can help you avoid getting taken by ads that aren't true, by diets that won't help you, by all those kind of things. Like, it just strikes me that we would automatically begin to move the science classroom into real. So kids are looking at authentic issues in their everyday life through a science lens, that kind of thing. So Lisa, can you just jump on and explain that comment a little bit? I'm going to turn off my mic. If you wouldn't mind just expanding on that a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you, Garfield, that science will, goof-proof people a little bit. However, I'm concerned, and I do not understand how come right now science is really getting criticized strongly for their way of working or laxity in overviewing articles, let's say. I've seen so many articles recently saying, this is not scientifically sound, and yet it was accepted and slipped through into the science world. And if I look at, like, the theorists about the fact, or not the fact, but the myth that vaccines cause autism, I'm wondering how come this goes against all scientific processes. How come these are picking up steam? And I'm quite concerned by this.
Okay, I think we'll see a few comments come up around that. I'll offer a quick thought, and then we'll move on. I saw the same issue come up, and a couple of years ago, CBC had a bit of a revelation in their own reporting, and that was that, as good journalists think that, or a premise is that when you present a story, you make sure you present the other side of the story. So each time they would do a climate change story, they would also make sure they reference or include an anti-climate change story. And they came to the realization that 2,000 well-renowned scientists around the world agree that climate change is a serious threat, and a small handful of climate change deniers, based on little credible science, are denying it, but they were getting equal airtime. And and I wonder if at times the media is at the root of the problem that you're citing, that if we're going to talk about this, we also need to report this. And as a result, I would argue this is even more of a reason why kids need this BS detector, that science needs to help them too. But how do you know if this is credible? I mean, Jenny McCarthy, when asked about her anti-vaccine, asked, where do you get your information? And she said, I got my degree from the University of Google. I mean, that was her quote. So, I think part of science would be, how do we, what is the process of science? How does something get validated? How do we test? And I wonder if that's not one of the kind of lasting pieces of science when I forget the details of the periodic table and so on, but I remember that science has a rigorous approach that we need to pay attention to. And by the way, I don't mean to politicize, but I feel like we've just gone through a decade where scientific expertise has been undervalued in this country, and I wonder what that does in the general public where science is silenced in favor of ideology. You know, maybe we need to recapture that scientific expertise, which goes through a rigorous process, needs to be valued, and kids need to be able to look at, you know, how do scientists validate and why. Anyway, those are some quick thoughts on my side of them. All right, so I see some other comments coming, and let's keep those and watch our time. I want to just explore with you, some of the things that I said earlier, and I want to be careful on this. That one of the things I think that schools need to do is to be what I would call sources of awe and wonder for students. And I mean this in this way, that there are elements within science that, like, if you said to me, pick an area of interest in science that you want to do, I can narrow down my areas of interest. But what will not be in that list of possibilities are things that I didn't even know about. And I can tell you, my daughter coming home from the university time, she's really excited by a new idea or something new. And I think part of our job, and I'm going to get to the other piece in a moment, but part of our job is to introduce kids to interesting issues that they had never considered, that it wasn't on their radar before. So how do we inspire awe and wonder in kids? And I want to just pick up on this. This is from at OISE, the inquiry-based science team, and they make a reference here. The journey towards scientific literacy, which we've just been talking about, begins with instilling a sense of wonder and sparking students' natural curiosity. And I wanted to pick up, thanks, Catherine, I do too. I just love that. I want to see how we keep that face through grade 12. Like hair gets a little longer, overalls are gone, but boy, when we have kids doing that. So anyway, I want you to note that in the statement that it's about instilling a sense of wonder and sparking curiosity. And I think that speaks to our role as educators. How do we excite kids to want to explore an area that before they came into my class they didn't see the interest, they didn't know about it? So I do think inviting kids to explore their own interests is important, but I think it's in sparking. So I use my daughter's example because I thought it was a wonderful, she came to grade 8 science with a passion for dance, and she realized that physics could help her improve dance. It was the teacher that had helped her see that, hey, physics has a role. So it did capture her interest, but by opening up a new door or avenue to it. So this is a conversation that came up with someone, actually via Twitter, and I want you to pause for a moment. In an inquiry classroom, and I noticed one of you earlier said you're supporting teachers in inquiry projects. Sometimes it is argued, and I think there's some validity to this, we want to just let kids pursue their interests or their passions, and I get that. So what is our role in an inquiry classroom when and the quote that was used is follow the wonderer? What if we just let kids wonder? What is my role? So I want you to respond to this if you could. If there are times, and by the way, our curriculum does define a lot of what we need to teach, so I can't get at the curriculum by just following the wonderer, but if there are those times in which we say to kids, pick an area of interest that you want to explore, what is our role in those situations? I'm going to pause and just invite you to share. And Colin, can you unpack as you wonder with them? What does that look like? So if you wouldn't mind sharing with me.
Yeah, well, I've had kids do, other, like your daughter, like the physics of ballet. I've had kids do, the physics of a curveball, for example, in baseball. And because they had a passion, and this one girl in particular was a baseball player and loved, the idea of unpacking and doing a project around the physics of a curveball. And so she was wondering about this. So I just sat down and wondered with her, oh, well, have you thought about this? And I wonder what would happen if you tried this. Or so it's just, it kind of, it put me in the place where you know what the physics curriculum is, and at the same point, you know what the student's passion is. And so you kind of wonder with them, but you kind of wonder them down the path where you know they can really dig into the science and the physics of it. So it's not, you kind of wonder with them, but you're also then saying, okay, I think if you go this way, you might, find some really rich ground to dig into in terms of your inquiry. Not giving them answers, but kind of pointing them in direction. So that's just one of the things that I do, and it's great because as every kid does a different idea, you get to wonder with them, and that's kind of exciting for a while, just to have the kids come up with ideas. Wow, I never thought of that. And then, it sort of energizes me too in the classroom. It's a lot of fun.
Thanks. That was a great answer, I have to tell you. I think I love the way you said that you wonder with them, but then you guide them. Like you help direct them. You know the curriculum. You know the subject area. And I like the way a number of you have stressed and calling you nice. You said, I don't give them the answer. Our job is not to teach kids the answer to provocative questions, but I would teach them the physics that might help them unlock the answer. So, it's figuring out. It's that I use the term. It's choreographing the learning. It's saying, knowing when to say, well, let me show you something that might be helpful in your exploration. Seizing the moment. But it's building the background knowledge. You may not be aware of, here's something you might want to look at. Here's a concept that that maybe is unfamiliar to you that might unlock this. So, I love that. That was such a helpful answer. But what I think is really important in this, that why I have concerns when inquiry becomes merely what are kids' interests, is we get a lot of kids who get lost and overwhelmed. They wander down paths that are going nowhere and waste a lot of time, ends up being unproductive, and they get frustrated. So what I love that you had there was, they make a mistake, as Siri has just posted, and then we step in and we teach it a little bit, not the answer they should have got at, but something that might help them rethink and realize, oh yeah, I see where I made my mistake. Or we might guide them down another path of exploration. I'll go back to saying I think we opened doors of exploration that they didn't think to go down, and they never would have without our guidance. So, that we celebrate mistakes and then we build on it. We let them, and I love someone mentioned earlier the collaboration. So thank you for this, because it's an issue with inquiry that I want. And by the way, the first statement when I asked this question, I think it's important for us to go back to for a moment, because it's kind of the point I wanted to get at. And that is, I still have to teach them how to assess sources. So notice how to identify credible and relevant sources to use, how to paraphrase, how to select and organize data and make sense of data. There's still an awful lot of teaching, and to me this is why our jobs matter, why the Khan Academy can't replace us, why going online and I can Google this isn't going to replace a good science teacher, because our job is to help them think scientifically and help them organize, make sense of, use criteria to assess credibility. I think there are so many pieces that we play such an important role. So that the inquiry is worthwhile, and productive for kids. So I wanted to just a couple of things as we pick up on what you're saying, and when we tweak and fortify, and this is where, as you think about the curriculum, a textbook you're using, an assignment you currently have, three key things that we want to be cognizant of. We want to infuse a spirit of inquiry. I would say, and you can see by my point here, I think there are already a lot of excellent things going on in science classrooms in Ontario, and what we want to do is think about, so how do I tweak my questions? Like, have I asked a question that invites a reasoned judgment? If I look at my question and realize I can look it up, it's a retrieval question, then I want to think about how I could reframe that so kids have to make a decision. This author makes several points about genetic engineering, which three of the arguments are most compelling reasons for or against or something. So getting kids to have to select from, to make judgments and so on. The second thing I'm suggesting is tweaking the sequencing of the question so that, when you have kids in this inquiry, one of the things that they need to learn to do and that inquiry needs to do is create a sustained ongoing inquiry. So how do we sequence those provocations? So we start from a big rich question and then we create a series of related questions. Well, if we're going to answer that, these are 2 or 3 big ideas I need to figure out. And what would I ask to figure out some of these big ideas? So we create this flow of, from a rich overarching provocation to related lines, we call inquiry. And lastly, fortifying inquiry-based teaching means we teach the intellectual tools they need to think about science. So what are the terms, concepts, ideas that they're going to need to successfully and thoughtfully engage with the curriculum. Now, I saw that, and I'm going to pause just for a moment. Someone said, and timing is important. Is there anything else you would add to my list? If we want to infuse a spirit of inquiry in science, I've suggested 3 things. Tweak questions and invite judgment, sequence those questions, and make sure we teach the intellectual tools they need. Anything else you would add to my list that is an important habit or teaching element that I should focus on? Is there anything else you would add? I'll just give you a minute to share a thought on that. Oh, great. So I like that, Siri. Thank you. So not only tweaking our questions, but helping students learn to ask powerful questions, ask thoughtful questions. Great. Okay, I think there may be another comment or 2 coming. I'll keep an eye out for it. Great. Clues to guide their thinking. Great. So experience working with hands-on. And Lisa, I'll turn off my mic and get you to jump on yours.
I'm not sure it would be one of the steps here, but I recall a student, he was testing bacteria and seeing if garlic and a substance from honey together, mixed together, had a big antibiotic effect, and we found that it did. And when I asked him to take it farther and make a candy that you could suck on to help sore throats, he said no, he'd had enough. I think part of differentiation or part of being a teacher is to have the instinct to say, okay, Jeremy, we'll stop there. And then when he's rested a few days later, if you have the opportunity, this was for a science fair, is to pick it up again and said, so if we transform this into a candy that could help sore throats, you might be able to market this. So what I meant by timing was to be able to give the kid the next step, but at the right moment. So I'm not sure how you would, if that fits into number 2, that's possible.
Great, thanks. I like that comment about timing. I also noticed that, and your urging him goes back to our fake, real, that it seemed to me that one of the ways you would encourage him is creating another authentic link into where that next step might take him, which is kind of an interesting connection. So I wanted to just, again, a provocative question for you, or statement. Teaching content should not be seen as a goal of education, but rather a necessary intellectual tool for solving problems, responding to provocative issues, or creating meaningful products or performances. So I want you to take a minute and agree or disagree with my statement, and feel free to somewhat agree or somewhat disagree or strongly agree or disagree. Do you agree with my statement that teaching content should not be seen as our goal of education, but is a necessary intellectual tool? Just let me turn off my mic and just invite you to share a thought. Should teaching content be our goal?
Here, I'll jump in here. I agree as well. I mean, I think we've all been guilty of it and seen, content as the goal in a lot of classrooms. But if you keep this in mind, it doesn't make content evil. Like sometimes people, think that textbook work or whatever is evil. But if you frame it that content is necessary, but it's not the goal. The goal is to produce problem solvers. And so, what information, what content do they need to then solve real world problems? It puts everything in a usable context. What it might do is reduce the amount of so-called facts that people are working with, and so they're teaching less quote-unquote content, but teaching more of how to use content to solve problems. So I think it's a great thing to keep in mind as we're working.
Great, thanks. That was really well put again. And that's the point I was hoping to get across, that the pendulum can swing at times, from that. We need an inquiry class that should ask questions and let kids figure out the content or uncover the content. And then we swing the other way when we start realizing kids don't have some basic knowledge of history, science, literacy, numeracy. And I would argue that we need to stop this pendulum from swinging and say you can't think deeply about something you know nothing about. So, but again, I partly make the statement to say what should drive the learning is the provocation, right? It's partly the order. Give me something worthwhile. Give me something meaningful. The content, like someone mentioned earlier, I'm more likely to remember if it actually had purpose. I have to say, sadly, my daughter came home about a month ago, and she said, despite earning marks in the 90s throughout high school, she said, this is finally starting to make sense to me. I'm starting to see a purpose to this science. She's always done well in science, but I think it's often been presented to her, you need to know this material because it's going to be on the test or the exam. And she said, I'm finally starting to see the reasons for this. It's starting to gel. Sadly, that's second-year university for her. So now, I don't know if that's atypical, but I'm glad to see we're all in agreement that content matters. So part of this statement wasn't don't teach content. To me, the most important is do teach content. What brought her understanding? I don't know. She did labs last year, but it may have been, and it may be the approach that the professors are using in second year. They're less survey and they're slowing down and going in depth. It may be her own decision finally to want to pursue neuroscience and psychology, and so she's defined her own purpose, and that may be another. But again, I want to just leave you with the notion that teaching content does matter. You're science experts. You bring something to the classroom. You should be valued for that content expertise in the context of something meaningful to kids. Just as a reminder, and many of you have been to sessions before, this is the framework from the Critical Thinking Consortium. If we want to promote a thinking classroom, have we created the climate where thinking is encouraged and supported? Have we framed our tasks so they invite kids to make those thoughtful decisions? Have we taken the time to build their capacity to think? And are we providing guidance that informs their thinking? And when I've been making references to intellectual tools, I know many of you are familiar with them already. Have we built the background knowledge kids need? Have we helped them think about the criteria that will help them determine credibility, compelling, useful, important, whatever the term is? Do they understand the language of thinking, what it means to analyze or evaluate or synthesize? What strategies are we giving them to help them make sense and organize? And what are the habits we want to promote? So those are when I make reference to the tools. I'll just quickly touch on, as I think about practices that undermine and enhance scientific inquiry, these are some things that I came up with. And again, I'd love you to add, if you could, please. Practices that undermine, I think when we tell kids they did something wrong, that can shut down the inquiry, versus how might you explain? I bet you didn't expect that to happen. What color were you expecting to get? Why do you think you didn't? So instead of telling kids you must have done something wrong or you didn't follow the instructions properly, I might invite students to think about how do you explain the reaction you got that you weren't expecting. When we say convergent questions, these are questions that are framed in a way that they direct students to an expected answer. So a convergent question might be, why is cow flatulence worse for the environment than heating our homes? Notice my question directed you to the answer you're supposed to get to, as opposed to inviting you to weigh in on it. I've told you the answer. The other, questions that require reasoned judgment. So we want to have open questions where kids reach the judgment, not arrive at ours. Labs as recipes to follow versus labs as inquiry. Concepts through rote, so memorize this concept versus through inductive reasoning, such as concept attainment. Here are yes examples and no examples, explain the concept. content to be consumed versus content to be scrutinized. It's essentially saying, here's your textbook, read it, memorize these things, answer these questions, retrieve information, versus has your text got it right? Well, what might someone else say? Do all scientists agree on this point? Getting kids to, when I provide a reading, I want kids to understand that textbooks have been constructed by somebody, and you should always wonder about, is this giving a balance? Is this solid science, or is there any elements of this that aren't? When you pick up a newspaper and you read a report, rather than saying, I read this in the paper and it must be true because it was reported in the Globe and Mail today, kids should question. So I think a routine practice is getting kids to have to question what they read. By the way, it might be that it's perfectly valid. Quick example. Teachers often want to tell kids don't use Wikipedia. I don't think that helps kids learn to scrutinize. I would say you can use any website you want as long as you can show it has the information is credible. I found on Wikipedia it said this. Good. Can you track the source back? Can you verify that against another source? Does it fit with what's generally accepted in science? Or does it seem like an anomaly, that others don't believe this, but it's sitting on Wikipedia? So kids should be invited to constantly scrutinize information regardless of the source. I won't spend a lot of time here because many of you have been through critical thinking, and you can retrieve these slides. I should say as well, the slides will be posted by Louise later. But this is just looking at, when we look at 3 types of questions, type 1 retrieval questions, type 2 preference, and type 3 thinking questions. So, just to give you a few examples, what are 3 common myths in science? Kids could list them. Here's a myth. Label the parts of a microscope. Here are the parts. Versus which myth is most humorous? That's a preference. I found this one funny. I like microscopes. I don't like. The thinking questions, you can see, are judgment. So which natural disaster poses the greatest threat? Given limited budgets, where should we put should we increase money to cell biology? So in other words, kids have to think, what's the payoff? What's the potential for this? So what we're trying to do is tweak our questions. I was going to show you this short video because I want to just touch on what I call big C and little c critical thinking in science. And I'm going to turn this to Louise to launch it because I don't know if I do it from here or if you've got it.
I've got it right here. Okay, folks, I'm going to drop the link in the chat, which you can click on and it'll open it in your own browser. I'm also going to open up the web tour and drop the link there, and it will play automatically for those of you whose web tour is working today.
And I'm going to ask, let me just, when you start watching this, I want you to stop it. There's a short explanation about going down the rabbit hole and coming back out of the rabbit hole and the role of science in that. So when you get to that part, there'll be 2 scientists who speak about the rabbit hole as an analogy and the parts of science about going down and coming back out. And then stop it after that because it'll go on beyond that, but we'll need to come back together.
Okay, and I'll follow that by saying after you get to that point and you come back to the room, give us a green check mark. Just stop the web tour because I think we should be all about ready to come on back.
So I just will quickly ask your thoughts on the video. Did you enjoy it? Could you use it in the class? Did you find it interesting to use or interesting to watch? And just as you're posting some thoughts on that, and I see that Louise posted the link if you want it. I mean, the full video is quite fascinating. It's a full. I think it's a 2 DVD set, but that excerpt is on YouTube. So the notion that I wanted to just get at through that is what I've been calling a bit, big C and little c critical thinking in science, and what do I mean by that? I think going down the rabbit hole is the big C in science, and those are the big questions. We go down the rabbit hole, it's the crazy part. Those are the big provocations that you might ask that drive a unit that has kids try to explain a phenomena, understand something in their world. And I would suggest the little c critical thinking in science is the day-to-day things. It's the so how do you explain what happened in this lab? The big C is, and how does this lab help us to explain this broader question we've been exploring? So, I think it's helpful for us to think about if I want a thinking classroom. Sometimes we get caught up in just big C. So we have a big project. The day-to-day learning can be largely transmissive, kids passively receiving, but then they have to take all of that learning that they're supposed to have done and apply it in solving a big problem. So we have a big C project, but we don't have day-to-day. And what I would like to argue is that if you want a thinking classroom, then thinking has to be the norm. It's the way we learn. It's the small things we do each day from, if you could come up with an interesting, accurate, and concise title for this phenomena in a section of the text, what would it be? Now, those are small things. Oh, interesting that you've used this in a philosophy class. That's great. Oh, it's wonderful. So big C, little c, like what are the projects, the big questions, the down the rabbit hole issues, small c, the day-to-day teaching. And let me just show you what that might look like. This would be a small c where I'm trying to get kids to uncover through this activity a conceptual understanding, so they sort things and label and with teacher guidance if they're not getting it. Absolutely, little c drives big C. Yeah, and our evaluation programs tend to go the other way. So this is a sample of, this would be a lesson. This would be something I would do in a day to help kids develop a conceptual understanding around an idea in science, and it would be a support to help uncover the bigger idea. Another example of, small c, so kids have to be able to explain their answer, so it's teaching the concept of potential energy and being able to explain it, but this would be situated within a broader task. So this is little c kind of, or using an Euler diagram, to explain climate and weather. Which set would you use? Sedimentary and metamorphic rock, which one would you use? And they have to be able to explain their reasoning using an Euler diagram. So these are samples where I'm embedding thinking. I'm teaching content, so the key thing here is today, you need to know this content if you're going to be able to uncover or respond to my big, rich question, but I want to be thoughtful about how I teach my day-to-day lessons, the content building, the conceptual building. Again, chemical and thermal energy, which of these best work? So I might teach a bit. Kids now have to convince me that this represents it. So I would fill in some background knowledge, but they'd have to select and defend why. Here's another example, just learning about electron microscopes and deciding whether or not a lab, what's your use, what are the advantages, disadvantages. Are psyllium and flagellum more alike or dissimilar? Again, that's a lesson. We're going to start off today. We're going to learn about these things, and you're going to have to figure out they serve similar purposes, but are they similar, more different? What would you say? Okay. Cell differentiation critical to the formation of tissues. I might start a class off by inviting kids to speculate. Would you say yes, it is, no, it's not, somewhat? What would your answer be? And partway through the class, they may want to change their answer at this point. At the end of the class, now what do you think? So planting the question up front. So those are, and I'm thinking now, Lisa, with your comment, what if I should have flipped these, shown big C and then how little c would support? That might be a better way to do this, to model that. So I love the way these sessions push me to rethink them. So those were day-to-day lessons. Whereas I'll show you, this might be something, it's just having a bit of fun, that I might ask students at the beginning of a course. I might ask them at the beginning of a unit, depending on how I do it. I'll show you this example. We'll modify it. Select and rank order the 3 most egregious science flaws in Hollywood film. So, here's a selection of flaws in film. Kids have to figure out what's the scientific flaw, and they get to put 3 of them on my ranking ladder. So which 2 will you leave off that are least frustrating, least infuriating as a scientist? And which one would you put at the top? Now, you see, I would do an activity like this, and you can change the content, but I'd invite kids at the beginning of a unit to pick 3, put them on, and think about why you might put them there. But as we work through the unit, I'll invite you to go back to that ranking ladder and decide if you want to change the order and or change which ones you put on. Do you think, now that we've been learning about whatever, do you think, I love that Bugs Bunny for physics, So which of these would you put on the ladder? Which goes at the top? Which is the third most frustrating to you? Do you change your order? Now that you understand the science better, does it change your order? So notice it's a question I might use to start a unit, to revisit it several times throughout, and to wrap up the unit. We're going to show you another video just shortly, and it's a Harvard video. I'm going to ask you to watch about, I don't know, let's watch maybe a minute and a half. So we'll play 90 seconds of this one, and then we'll stop. And I'll get Louise to send you the link, or however we do this, but we'll do it for 90 seconds. I think you'll get enough of it, and you can finish it later if you're compelled to.
Okay, here it comes, folks.
So I'll just give you a little bit of a context, and if you want to comment, I mean, I hope you enjoyed that. I just find that a really cool video. This question that you see on the screen was asked in my daughter's second-year biology class, and it was asked the very first class, how many cellular processes can you identify? It's a diagnostic for the professor. They then, a couple of times throughout the course, she would pause and go, now how many cellular processes can you find? And at the last day of the class, they showed this video, and she was asked, the professor said, if you understood my course, you should have found 16 cellular processes. I just love that as a way to frame the course and say, see how many cellular processes. And then as kids have these aha moments, and they get to check for understanding. By the way, my daughter would go back every once in a while on her own and just watch the video. And go, oh, I recognize this now. But that's what I mean by a big C question, that there's an overarching question, and as lessons are taught, they can check their understanding against. One more short video, sorry for all the videos. This is, we live in Caledon East, and this is the highway running from Orangeville down to Brampton. There's a fairly long hill, and people claim this is a magnetic hill that you see in the background with the guardrail, the main highway coming down. You turn left heading south, and you kind of hang a left and you come around to a little road here, and you come down this hill. If you look closely behind the tree in the picture, you can see my son standing there with his skateboard. And what's going to happen when we play the video, it's a short video, his skateboard gets away from him and begins to coast uphill. He will stop it, step on his board, and coast up the hill. So, oh, that one's not ready. Okay, so that's fine. Here's the question we give students, and I want to show you, so this is a magnetic hill, as people call it. I used my son on a skateboard so people didn't think my truck was in drive. And we gave kids this explanation. The skateboarder is able to coast uphill because the overall force of gravity created by the decline of the steeper hill has a greater effect on the mass than the opposing force created by the small incline in which he is traveling. Could I just ask let me ask you this. how many of you have students in your class, grades 7, 8, 9, and hopefully not grade 12? How many of you have students who would buy that explanation, would say, yep, sounds good to me? You have those students who would believe my explanation. Okay, so what I'm doing here is, so we show kids the video, short video. He appears to coast up the hill. We give them this very scientific-y sounding explanation. I love it. Exactly. Sounds sciencey. They want to prove it. And then we say, okay. By the way, when I was writing this, my daughter came in the room and she looked and she said, Dad, that makes absolutely no sense. I said, but why? Explain to me why. By the way, I had used some inaccurate, I had the big hill and the small hill, and she corrected me and said, well, that's not proper science language anyway, because the big hill could have a smaller incline and so on. Anyway, so I said, well, can you help me write it so it sounds believable? I have to tell you, what was fascinating was watching her struggle to write a wrong answer that sounded convincing. It's a really interesting thinking task to give your kids. Write a believable answer that's wrong, that can convince others. Write a science hoax that uses enough credible science that someone would be convinced, but it's in fact wrong. By the way, I knew my daughter really understood her physics when I said, okay, well, what's wrong with my answer? And she got out a piece of paper and she sketched for me why this makes no sense, that the effect of gravity can't pull in two different directions at the same time. By the way, if you want to know the answer to these, it's an optical illusion. Because you can't see the horizon because of that hill in the background, it creates the illusion of an upward incline, which is in fact false. But getting kids to test it out. So what I'm showing here is a big C. Is I show this the first day, and we have the next week to try to figure out how we would prove it right or wrong. And the kids, so they're trying to explain a broader concept, and now through a series of experiments, a lab, a video, some teacher-directed lessons, kids try to unpack what's wrong with this, and so write me a reasonable explanation instead. So that's a big C. Now, I'm going to take you back one last time, and then we'll try to shift a little bit. At the beginning, I showed you 3 classrooms, and some of you said, well, it depends what's going on in that class. I want to show you what's going on in that class by having you watch the video that excerpt was taken from. And I'll invite you to then think about, is this a thinking classroom? How well, and are there things you would change in the science classroom? So this one will launch, Louise, is that okay? So we'll watch this video and just think about what they're doing and anything you would change or how you would improve it. So, wouldn't it be nice to have that technology? What I want you to do when you look at that is just to think about, and so I use that video for increasingly for 2 purposes. One is I want to take you back to where we began with, and to invite people to think about the fake to real paradigm, and think about where would that fit as kids engage in a contest for bridge building and so on, and how close does it get in hitting where we want. And the second, as you can see, is the digitally enhanced. Is technology being used to help us think deeply about the curriculum in ways that would be more difficult or not possible to do without the technology. So kind of 2 uses for me in that. But I did want to answer that question that some of you asked at the beginning by bringing that class to life and saying, well, there it is. So any quick comments from you about what did you think it was an effective use of technology? Did you think it was an effective use of scientific thinking and reasoning to model critical thinking in the science classroom? Any changes you would make or recommend? So let's give you a minute. We're running a little short on time, so I'll just give you maybe a minute or 30 seconds if you want to throw up any comments, then I'll move along. So lots of positive comments, and I think I saw a comment, Hassan, looking at how do we fit that in other, and it sets the bar pretty high. They had all the technology. Like, wouldn't it be nice to have that 3D printer and all that software and a whole wall of glass? I mean, they had it all. But I think what we want to do is look at what were the elements that were really powerful, and how could we replicate it in other ways if it's not fully there? But what did we like the most? So I want to touch on, and we'll see how far we get in this, what I call 8 suggestions, and we'll try to go through this. We only have a few minutes, but we'll see how far we can get. And last time I did a webinar, we kind of got about halfway as well, and said, oh, maybe we should do a follow-up session and finish the second half. But we'll see how we do. So one of the phrases we've been using a lot with teachers, and it kind of framed the book we published on creating thinking classrooms, was affirm, revise, and aspire to. And sometimes with kids it might be affirm, revise, and extend. And what we mean by this is invite kids to speculate, to offer a prediction, to try an explanation. So I think someone earlier mentioned a task. I can't remember the task off the top of my head now. But what we would do is invite kids to offer a possible explanation, such as the skateboarder I showed you earlier. And as they learn, as the science is unpacked with kids, you invite them to go back, and to what degree has your answer been affirmed? What did you learn that says, ha, I was right, I was on the right track? What small revisions would you like to make? So revise is, I'm on the right track, but here's some things I've learned that help me to refine my answer, revise my answer. And aspire is like, how would you like to use this in bigger, grander ways, or how could you extend the learning, take it further? So, for example, in grade 11, my daughter had to explain why a curveball curves. So in baseball, what causes a curveball to curve, and why is it hard to hit? And as her teacher and I talked, we said, imagine if we gave that question the first day, and she got to try out an explanation why she thinks it's doing that. And as you teach her the physics, she watches videos, reads her text, does an experiment, she takes out the answer she wrote and says, well, here I was right. Here I need to make a revision. No, I need to think differently about this. So the idea is to allow kids to wonder, offer an initial suggestion, and as the learning unfolds, revise and so on. This is just looping back from where we just come from. 3 key foundations of placing thinking at the core of a science program. That thinking involves making reasoned judgments using criteria. So always asking ourselves, so where in my lesson today, where in my overarching task are kids being asked to make a thoughtful or reasoned judgment using criteria? The second thing to keep in mind that we talked about earlier, that we need to teach the intellectual tools that will support and allow for quality thinking, and that critical thinking is a methodology, not an end-of-unit task, which I stressed earlier. In other words, it's how you learn. That the science is fundamentally an inquiry subject, and that thinking is what you do. It's what scientists do. You don't come in here to memorize content. Thinking is our methodology, and it doesn't happen at the end. It happens throughout. This quote by Jer Brophy, I think, is really powerful when he said, disconnected factual information is not very meaningful or memorable. When students lack context to richly connected networks of ideas to enhance its meaningfulness, they're forced to rely on rote memorization instead of sophisticated learning. Earlier when I said my daughter was having these aha, I think it's because for her, in part, she's starting to see the context, she's starting to make connections across. So she's built a rather increasingly large body of scientific knowledge. I think she's beginning to see connections across, and that's where the light bulbs and the excitement is. I think we need to do that younger with kids. Yes, we teach a lot of material in a biology course, but what's the unifying concept that we can organize it around? There's an example of what we talked earlier that I was putting together last night. Actually, my apologies, I forgot that I put this in here at all, but you can now access it as well. So I have, a fake, you take a test, the teacher marks, and so we've talked about this. So I'll leave it at that. And what we want to think about, and maybe this will be a good place for us to pause shortly, to imagine learning flowing from a real task, an authentic challenge, rather than the challenge being proof of learning. So what I mean by that, if I can just show you a couple of quick things and we'll tie it together. This is well, I'm going to jump ahead and come back to this. Let me just, maybe I can't. There was one slide I wanted to show you, this one here. Then I'm going to back up. I think currently in schools, in most cases, we tend to use our tasks as proof students have learned. So often what we will think about, notice the language even, assessment tasks, summative assessments, culminating tasks. They all suggest that the task is the demonstration of the evidence kids provide at the end of a unit. So I'm going to teach this material, and then you will complete this task, which will provide proof that you've learned what you were supposed to learn. And what I want to suggest is that we consider turning that on end, and that the task becomes the invitation to do the learning. So instead of, I'll teach you physics, and at the end of the unit, you'll be able to explain this if you've learned it. We invite kids at the beginning to provide an explanation that they will go deeper with, or to develop a product or performance. And as you learn, your answer will develop, unfold, and get deeper and deeper. And that teachers are what I call choreographers of learning. So earlier when we said, about the wonderment, it's knowing when to step in, knowing when to teach a new concept that will help move kids forward, when to ask another provocative question, choreographing the tools and the learning that needs to happen. So I'm going to back up to show you what I meant by that. This is the one I mentioned earlier. We developed it as a cascade after I talked with my daughter's teacher as we chatted. And we thought about Newton's laws of motion and how can they help us explain movement in everyday life. We adapted this for a grade 11 college, thinking most kids in grade 11 are probably getting their license that year. If Newton were your driving instructor, Isaac Newton sitting beside you teaching you how to drive, what 4 pieces of advice might he give you that would apply to concepts? And so you'll notice you have to have one on gravity, one on inertia, one on force, and one on action and reaction. And kids have to inquire into, you can see the related questions. And the D of L means demonstration of learning. Come up with a safe driving tip that takes gravity into consideration, inertia, and so on, and put those together into, as you can see up above, a set of illustrations with advice on teaching. So notice what comes first is an invitation of, what do you think Newton would say? What's important to safe driving? As we learn each of these pieces, you'll go back to the 4 that you initially jotted down, and you'll add to them, you'll refine them. You might drop one and add a different one instead. But the task comes first, and then we can begin to explore, and the learning unfolds. So what I want to do is suggest that we make wondering an invitation, invite kids to speculate, or as you can see here, dream big, and as they learn, they unpack, deepen, and add to their thinking. And so, and I think we're going to run out of time here, probably a good place to transition. This is around the notion of an inquiry versus a sustained inquiry. That I could run an inquiry class where each day kids inquire into another question or another thing that they wonder about. But sustained inquiry realizes that the real power of inquiry is not the single question, it's the careful sequencing of questions that has kids live with the problem longer. So, that question about why does a curveball curve, they get to think about that over 2 or 3 weeks as they explore it, and their thinking goes deeper. So I am happy to, and I'll leave this in Louise's hands, and I can see a question coming up. I am quite happy if we want to do a follow-up session that could build, that would start right here. Like, what does it mean to look at sustained inquiry? What might that look like in science? How do we build on the quality work that's going on in class, but sequence it so it takes kids deeper and deeper? So if there's interest, we'll find a day, we can send that out, and maybe even slow down and kick around ideas and flesh them out, and make it a bit of presentation and working together. So happy to do that. I have another meeting coming up now, and others have to go, and I hope you found this useful. I found your comments absolutely wonderful, so thank you for your input, and I'm certainly going to go back and pull out some stuff. So as I said, if we want to explore sustained inquiry in science, I'll bring some examples, and we'll certainly look at that.
Thank you so much, Garfield. You certainly have engaged us tonight in very thoughtful discussion, and you always have so many creative ideas to help us to engage students to wonder and to learn. I really would support doing a follow-up session if the interest is there. So when you do your feedback survey, do let us know if you would be interested in a part 2 where you could actually start doing some of the work and participating in a deeper way here. So let us know, and as Garfield mentioned, he'd be happy to facilitate it. I'd like to thank each of you for giving of your time to join us tonight and for actively participating. It was nice to see people getting on the mic and participating in the webinar in that way. Louise will send you the follow-up email tomorrow with links to the recorded session and all the resources. I would encourage you to take a few minutes and to fill out the exit survey. The link is in the center of the page there. We do use your feedback and suggestion to improve our program. Perfect example is over the last couple of years, teachers have asked if we could provide certificates of participation in OTF Connect. And I am very happy to announce that this year we are providing just that, a certificate of participation. What you need to do is fill out the survey. Once you complete the survey and submit it, you will have an opportunity to create your certificate. You can then save it as a PDF and print it for your use. Please see the link at the bottom of the page there of the screen. That'll take you to upcoming sessions in our calendar. Do share this link with your colleagues and encourage them to participate. We've got more webinars the rest of this week and next week, and we're in the process of planning a very, very rich program for the winter spring. So thank you, Garfield, and thank you, Louise, for all your work, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening.